Good afternoon, everyone. Confident Now webinar series would like to welcome you all for the second in our four-part series on how to improve compliance and make it efficient around the world. We are very pleased to have our expert Jay Crossland from Crossland Advisors in this conversation in defining agile tools and how to redefine compliance with these new improved tools. So the speakers are myself. I'm Bhavesh, Bhagat. I'm one of the co-founders and chairman of Confident Governance. We are essentially democratizing governance with a governance as a service platform around the world. And we are very excited to be hosting this webinar. And I would like to introduce to you our expert of the day, Mr. Jay Crossland. Jay, why don't you take it forward and introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Bhavesh, and welcome to everyone attending. I have a 39-year career in financial management, internal audit, advisory services across almost every industry. And prior to forming Crossland Advisors, I spent 18 years with Ernst & Young as well as some other internal audit positions in other organizations. I've definitely witnessed the various ways organizations tackle compliance requirements, and I'm sure everyone on the webcast will benefit greatly from the information we're about to present.
Thanks a lot, Jay. So we'll get started. But before we get started with today's seminar and the webinar, we would like to remind the attendees that we have two more in this four-part series on making compliance effective and agile. The third one is on 10th November, where we'll be discussing effective enterprise risk management. And then the final one is going to connect all the information that we've covered in the first three parts and then focus on overall creating an efficient compliance program and some strategies for chief compliance officers globally to implement some best practices. So essentially, our game plan for today is continuing this conversation on how to improve compliance, and we'll look at the current state of compliance tools, how to make them agile with the new state of technology, and we'll discuss the 5 key characteristics of some of the best in-class agile platforms like Confident Governance. So the key takeaway is really we want to make sure that if you are going to make compliance effective, you cannot do it with manual or existing status quo type of systems. You must upgrade and evolve with latest and greatest agile, lightweight, and very efficient tools and techniques. And we just want to recap what we captured in the past webinar quickly, but we saw these are the 3 key challenges that key compliance officers around the world are facing. Number 1 is the rapid velocity of change. The change is very, very happening at a phenomenal speed in our industries and in our personal and professional lives due to technology and all other social factors. We see that there's a definite lack of transparency in business processes and companies, and that's causing issues related to compliance, and tools and automation is part of that problem, wrong tools, if I may say. And then finally, shifting focus to keep up with the changing nature of risk. So companies are having to essentially focus on not just compliance, but all sorts of operational, financial, strategic types of risks and connect the dot and just not be narrow focused in this space for governance, risk, and compliance. And so with that being the problem, what I'm seeing right now is the conventional set of compliance management tools is essentially not able to handle the complexity that you see on the screen. And I think I'd like to bring Jay into this conversation. What are you seeing, Jay, in terms of the existing state of compliance tools? I mean, are some of your customers automating, or they are still in manual systems, or what are you seeing?
Yeah, I'm mostly seeing very manual processes, very simple tools, a lot of SharePoint and Excel, which, tools is probably a stretch for those. They're more databases for housing and sometimes sharing information, and SharePoint definitely has some automated alerting if there's things that need to be done. But still, it's very, very simple tools. The one thing is, again, what that creates is an environment of silos. It doesn't really promote collaboration, which is key to any compliance process. It's interesting too that some of my clients purchased tools many years ago, and they actually have kind of shelved them or decided not to use them because they were complex, or at the time they didn't suit the needs. And I do have a client I'm working with now who's going through a reevaluation of their enterprise risk management process, and one thing they're going to do at the end is look at tools, but they're taking the proper approach. They're looking at the process, and then you're going to find a tool later on to fit the process, versus a lot of companies, I think early on, and when they decided to do anything with compliance, they decided to buy a tool figuring that would be their solution, and really it's not the solution. It's just the facilitating the process.
I think that's an excellent point. So thanks for that insight, Jay. I think, as you can see on the screen, this problem of automating compliance and risk management is a complex problem, because not only do the executives and the chief compliance and audit officers have to focus on the risk, but they have to do it in multiple countries, multiple departments, across multi-regulations, and all sorts of business processes at the bottom. So you can see with this type of a cross point, this is a very, very complicated challenge. Now, here's why all the existing technology has failed, and exactly, Jay, as you indicated, I've seen time and again where companies launch some type of compliance tool. Maybe they bought it 10 years ago for SOX or whatever. That tool is just outdated and outmoded, and none of these old tools are able to give the transparency that is required for the executives to be sleeping peacefully and be satisfied that they know what's going on in their companies. And the greatest example of this problem is what we are hearing in the news as we speak. The largest bank in the world by market cap about in second quarter of this year was Wells Fargo. It is no longer the largest bank in the world, because the CEO and the board had no clue. They had no transparency about a massive fraud being perpetrated by over 5,000 employees of theirs to generate more revenue and generate more personal income with bonuses and other types of salary by meeting sales quotas and going over those sales quotas that the bank sales practices were doing. Now, a normal compliance tool would never catch all that, because number one, it's not agile, it's not transparent between departments, it is extremely manually intensive, and to be sure, a bank like Wells Fargo probably has spent close to $1 billion just on compliance tools. And like Jay said, after spending so much money, their tools are ineffective, and the CEO pretty much will not be in his job because he had no transparency, and the systems were inefficient and not agile. So people bypassed all the systems and they created this fraud. So what we want to do is we want to eliminate these unsustainable legacy systems and move towards what we call the agile governance as a service world. And that's really where companies need to be going. And if you don't think like this, really the cost is massive. So just in case of Wells Fargo, they were fined $185 million, the largest fine ever for a financial services industry in U.S. And after this news broke, they lost about $25 billion in their market cap. So the point being, what we are talking in this webinar, Jay and I, are really directly impacting the bottom line and the existing business processes and controls and practices in companies. And those companies who want to survive and thrive in the next decade or so are going to be the smart ones who evolve with this newer set of tools. And the good news is these tools are very cost effective and much more easier. So as you can see on the slide, the cost is tremendously more for the old tools. The old tools are very passive, and they are basically uh, just not dynamically updating and changing as the business and the regulatory information changes. So all of these problems need to be solved by the approach for what we call agile governance, and that's really where Confident Governance is a world leader, where we are taking we are basically changing the industry by disrupting the whole status quo model. So what do I mean by leveraging agility in compliance? Uh, I think, Jay, you mentioned something which is very key, and I want you to maybe spend 30 seconds again rephrasing that. But you said business process should be the driver. What do you mean by that? Because I've seen that as a big gotcha for many companies. They think buying a tool is essentially going to solve everything, and that's never the case. So can you just revisit that very key point that you were just indicating?
Sure. Yeah, business process is the key. I mean, think about, more recent was the Sarbanes-Oxley not that long ago, and again, people bought tools thinking it's going to help them, but again, what they really need to do is put resources on it to understand the processes, see how they interrelate with each other, identify the controls, and then put all that information into a tool. So, I mean, it's understanding the compliance process. It's knowing where all the components within the organization, where are there any overlaps or dependencies, who's responsible for what, and all those kind of pieces of information in a compliance environment, and then using a tool then to help facilitate staying in compliance and knowing what the next step is, or the next compliance requirement is that they need to make sure it gets filed, if something gets filed or something like that. But you still have to know the process and the players and all the components before you can actually start using a tool anyway.
Yeah, and I think that's precisely why in the agile compliance world, what you need is a tool that can be sustainable and scalable and adaptable to changes in your processes. Because what I find is tools are good when they are implemented for the first year, but then pretty much they get stale. And with the agile approach of confident governance, the tool is never stale. It's constantly getting updated as you speak, without any impact and any cost to the company. And so as the final point, many companies, when they are trying to think about agility, in the old legacy world, they even weigh the cost and benefit of using Excel or creating some tool or database in-house versus buying some software from outside, because it was very expensive. Now with this new approach, that decision in fact doesn't even apply, because the cost of this automation has come down so much that instead of 6 figures, now you can do things for just tens of 10 to 50,000 US dollars to get started, and scale up to thousands of users as your needs change. And you can start with 1 user versus 100 users, and so on and so forth. So I think this whole ballgame has changed, and the reason why this has changed is because the platform as a service that confident governance and agile tools deliver is really groundbreaking in this business. So what we are doing is we are creating governance as a service platform that we've invented, and this type of platform then is used for not just compliance but many different use cases like enterprise risk management, contracts management, ITIL compliance, Six Sigma quality management, project governance, all sorts of things where smart companies can benefit from a platform like this. And the way it's enabled is because of native build of this platform in the cloud, so it is enabled anywhere, anytime, any device, and that's a very important feature of these technologies. It has contextual collaboration, which I think is key, as Jay indicated earlier. Many existing companies do not have any collaborative process in compliance. And it has industry business-driven regulatory and vertical rules, which is very important to keep evolving with the company and their compliance and business process requirements as they evolve. And lastly, the connection of these type of technologies to real-time visual visibility with geospatial and Google Earth and these type of mapping intelligence, very important to know where your risks are. And so now we would like to summarize the key 5 benefits or characteristics of these agile tools. And so number 1, I think, is the collaboration. And so with collaboration, as you can see on the screen, most companies nowadays have younger generation in risk management and audit, mostly millennials, and they have grown up using Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, all these type of technologies. So they expect the same type of ease of use and collaborative ability in the tool and risk management process that they are enabling. If you don't give them that, systems such as SAP, Oracle, old, very complex and very big ERP systems, they also have these risk management extensions, but they are extremely inflexible and non-collaborative from our experience. So Jay, what are your thoughts on this importance for collaboration? I mean, you mentioned some of your clients are using SharePoint and Excel. How do you see them filling this void of collaboration? Because to me, this is the biggest problem in the compliance technology of the old legacy systems. Go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, and what I see, again, those clients are using those simple tools, again, tools being a stretch of the in terms, but they tend to, they're going to have a meeting, whether it's weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual, whatever the frequency of meetings are, then it's trying to get everyone together in those meetings to get a quorum. Some people will be calling in, some people will be, in person. So I see, the collaboration ability of the tool, and especially look at the look and feel that the millennial generation is used to, making this a lot easier process than trying to find a date that fits everyone, trying to get everybody together in a room, those kind of things, which you need that from time to time. The FaceTime is great, but you can get a lot more done in between. Maybe you have those in-person meetings less frequently, and if you have this collaboration functionality within the tool.
Yeah, and so I think the collaboration, we cannot stress enough the most important characteristic of this type of technology, and that's really where confident governance is enabled with the collaborative rules engine at the heart. And then as you can see on the screen, there is actual document management embedded in the collaboration, because what are you collaborating with? Not just meetings, but with documents, with version controlling of your risk management and controls testing and audit committee reports and all those kind of things. So this is the same type of powerful system that the world's largest sales system, Salesforce.com, uses in its customer relationship management. And what we see is when you make systems as easy to use as a salesperson can use, your risk management and other complex processes can become that much more efficient with collaboration. So that's point number 1. Number 2 is really the mapping of all these controls and risks globally, because as we saw in that first slide with the very complicated matrix of what this problem is, you have to be able to visualize this in dynamic dashboards with real-time visibility into the location and physical building and the floor and the actual address of where this risk is. And this is the kind of stuff that old tools just are not designed for. This is all possible with the cloud, social, and mobile technologies, and leveraging some of these newer emerging platforms to continue the risk management evolving with a real focus on being trying to catch the risk around the corner. So you always want to be ahead of the curve, not just catching up in terms of risk management. The next key point is centralized data. Now this sounds very easy, but most of the tools and old legacy systems are not efficient in keeping track of the data because they just house it in some server or some database in-house in a company. And if it's co-located, it might be in some software company, but it's not 99.9% available, and neither is it upgradable. And all this data is very hard to manage and migrate if the company wants to choose. So I think it's very important because, Jay, as you discussed, your clients have many times shelved their old tools. I'm curious, what was the experience? Because from my experience, when a company stops using an old tool, they essentially go back to Excel and they have to restart their checklist and matrices in Excel because the old software is unable to export everything and connect everything properly on a click of a button. I don't know if, what have you observed in that space in terms of
that's true.
centralization of data and migration of data?
Well, I think that's where SharePoint came into play more so. When I think they probably started, if I go back and look at how they evolved, they may have had a tool, they may not have had a tool. They decided they couldn't really use it, or if they never had one. Then they started with Excel because everybody knew Excel was simple, maybe even access database. But then as they got into trying to do some collaboration or sharing of documents, or at least have a central repository, that's where SharePoint probably came into play a little bit more, where it made it a little bit easier for them to put things there in the SharePoint site and have members of the compliance group, especially if they're decentralized, be able to access those from anywhere. But it's, again, you may have to rework the data each time, or at least there's some administrative requirements even on SharePoint to get people set up properly and give them access to the proper folders and things like that. It's still just a repository. It's not really designed to take that data and report on it and manipulate it versus, everything's still Excel files or Word files or something like that.
Yeah, and that's key. So again, it's all diversified, dispersed. It's not in central place, and that's the key with tool like Confident Governance, where everything is in one org, and then anywhere from a Android phone or iPhone or a tablet as well as a PC, without installing anything else, you are able to access all that, and that's the key. And so that brings us to the fourth point, and then we'll wrap up in a couple of minutes. But the scalability is the key. So the Agile compliance approach that Confident Governance brings to the table, this type of approach really does not care about how big your problem is. You can start as small as, like we discussed, with one user, with one small pilot business process. And then as you scale, you can evolve into compliance, and then you can evolve into ERM and all sorts of other use cases. Because what we find most of the time is companies start where the biggest pain point is, and usually that's in the compliance domain. And so you start by automating and making compliance efficient, then you start scaling up to enterprise risk management, and then you kind of evolve into what we call enterprise board level risk reporting in real-time transparency. And that's what some of our clients are doing, where they've eliminated PowerPoint and Excel spreadsheets from their risk and compliance process. Everything is in real time in the system, and then when they have audit committee and risk management meetings, they just pull up the system and show live dashboarding rather than creating. That's extremely powerful. So if this type of approach was there at Wells Fargo, if the CEO was able to see and ask real tough questions to the risk VP or the risk executive chief compliance officer, with seeing real-time dashboard and reporting of what are the big problems, where is the big control gaps, some of this stuff you can't hide. So I think the key is to be real-time transparent, and sometimes it's very painful because if companies have not, they are not used to that much transparency, it's something that they have to get used to because there's the new world. And that brings us to the final point of, go ahead.
just want to add to that when I get through, really it's on this slide, where, again, what I'm seeing is like word reports going to the board and executive management, and they don't have time to be reading all those reports. They need something that's quick and easy that points to where are the issues that we need to be worried about. And, if you look back at all these benefits, geographically knowing where those issues are, which department, who's responsible, what's the issue, when was it last tested, all these kind of things. Having a great dashboard is really, which I think is this slide now, the intuitiveness of the tool is really what's important, because again, executive management and board, they don't have time to read reports. They just want a quick snapshot and be able to easily isolate where they need to spend their time and efforts.
I think that's a key point because, again, to your point, our experiences, the boards and the top-level executives are very visual. So they, exactly like you said, they don't have time to go through hundreds of line items or some reports that you bring to the table in an Excel. They want, what are my top 3, top 5, and then they want to drill down on the top issues. They want to do management by exception. And so they want to identify where the problems and exceptions are and focus on those. And so that kind of brings us to the final point of intuitiveness. What we find is with confident governance and the agility, what we want to bring to the table is the key point of usability. And if you make something usable, the user interface is latest and greatest, cutting edge, like social media and Facebook in a corporate environment, completely secure with 2 form factor authentication, then what we find is the end users adopt this type of platform very, very easily. They love it, and then they spread it because it's so easy. What we've seen time and again is compliance starts using the platform like CG, and then they talk to contracts management. So then the contract management wants to automate governance of their contract lifecycle management. Then they talk to environment, health and safety, and now slowly each department is enabling their best practice compliance, but with the same tool and the same platform. So company is not investing in 50 tools for 50 departments. That's the power of this approach. And then, of course, like Jay, you mentioned, when you do it in this type of easy and intuitive fashion, if I'm on the CEO or the board level seat, my visibility dramatically changes because I'm able to log in my own phone and really constantly communicate with the field and have a pulse on the finger of the field where my controls and risks are. And so when we do it in this way, what we find is there's real action on making good governance part of good business practices, and therefore the risk level is minimized. And I think that kind of brings us to the closure of the 5 key elements of the Agile systems. Hopefully, this adds value into your understanding of why you need to make your compliance tools automated and agile. And so I think the key 3 points are manual systems just are not going to be sustainable and scalable. If you are not having a good, easy to use system, you must really research and get to the right tool. And collaboration and ease of use, they are the key 2 pillars of confident governance is governance as a service platform. And those are the qualities that you must look for in any technology that you are looking at. And finally, the last point is this type of approach is extremely cost efficient. So you can get started in a very low cost fashion, and then you can evolve with it. And essentially, it's low hanging fruit. Every time you do a small piece, you are generating success, and then your top management sees that, and then you scale up from there. So with that being said, this is our contact information. We have time for one question, and then we'll wrap up, but we would like to thank you all in advance. There is a question, does aggregating compliance requirement reduce compliance costs? So I guess, Jay, what are your thoughts on this silo-based approach that you see oftentimes? We discussed last time as well as in this webinar, but the compliance mandates are not aggregated. And so with a platform like CG and by you making things agile, what do you think is the cost efficiencies that companies can gain?
Well, one, they may be using various tools. If it's not a centralized or collaborative or aggregated process, It might be using multiple tools, so there you'd have the cost of those tools and the cost of maintaining those tools. I think it's more important, though, you really know the full impact of compliance across the organization, who's responsible for what, because, again, if you don't aggregate the efforts and the requirements, do you really have the complete picture. So you need a tool that can help you, one, document all that, and two, keep track of that when knowing who to go to if you have specific questions, or making sure that people are satisfying the requirements that they need to within the time frames. A lot of times there's specific time frames when things have to be filed or compliance needs to be reevaluated within the organization. So it's knowing all the, it's just the cost of having it more decentralized or spread out is definitely greater. Just if not with the actual cost of tools, but just with the overall effort not being coordinated, and probably there's duplication of efforts and duplication of activities. But like I said, the biggest concern there is just knowing the full compliance picture and the full impact.
So excellent point, and I think with that being said, we are at the end of our time. So you have contact information for myself and Jay Crossland on the screen. Feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn, Twitter, or at our emails, which are in the presentation. And these presentations and the recording of the webinar will be shared with you and your colleagues later on in the next week. And feel free to reach out to us anytime if you have any further questions and want to discuss this very important subject. So thank you all for sharing half an hour of your very important time and afternoon with us. We wish you all the best and have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you, Jay, and we look forward to having you again in this webinar series.
Thank you.